What's up, fellow bookworms, and welcome back to the channel. My name is Dylan, and in this video, we are going to be comparing the Amazon Kindle Paperwhite to the Barnes & Noble Nook. And the reason for this video is for Christmas, my wife asked for a Nook. Even though we have 4 Kindles, I think, she wanted a Nook simply because it was pink and white. Unlike this one that has a pink case, it was pretty similar. But this one is black on the front, which is obviously unacceptable. So she got a Nook for Christmas, and since then, we've both been kind of tinkering around with it. And I thought it would be fun to make a video where we compare the two. If you're watching this video, I'm sure you are either in the market for a new e-reader, either really love the Kindle and are here to cheer it on, really love the Nook and are here to cheer the Nook on. I don't know exactly why you might be watching this video, but I'm glad you are. But I do want to say from the outset that this is not going to be a super duper in-depth, detail by detail comparison of these two devices because nobody wants to watch a video like that. It would be an hour long. Instead, I want to just briefly give an overview of the specs, talk about some things I really like and dislike about each device, and then at the end, I'll give a verdict as to which is my personal favorite and which one I would recommend if I was shopping for an e-reader today. So as for the specs, and again, this is just going to be really quick, they both have a 300 pixels per inch screen, which means as far as resolution goes, they should be about the same. As far as storage goes, the Nook actually wins out coming standard with 32 gigabytes, whereas the Paperwhite comes standard at 8 gigabytes. And then if you want to upgrade, you can do 16 gigabytes. I do have to say though, 32 gigabytes is more than probably any one person would ever need. 8 gigabytes, honestly, is probably as much as any person could ever really use. Ebooks are incredibly small. They're just text files, but it's nice to have all that extra storage. Maybe you're like me, it's just nice to have. As far as the display goes, they are both 300 pixels per inch, but physically speaking, the screen on the Nook is 6 inches, while the screen on the Paperwhite is 6.8 inches. So not that big of a difference on paper, but when you compare in this super scientific comparison, you see that it is quite noticeable that 0.8 inches in the hand, the Kindle just feels a lot bigger. The Paperwhite does support Audible using Bluetooth, whereas the Nook does not currently feature any Bluetooth connectivity or audiobook connectivity. Speaking of connectivity, the Paperwhite will connect to Wi-Fi, it will connect via USB-C, and it will also connect via Bluetooth, as we just said, whereas the Nook will connect via Wi-Fi and also USB-C. And then lastly, as far as weight is concerned, the Paperwhite is just marginally heavier, coming in at just over 7 ounces, while the Nook is a little bit lighter, coming in at about 5.5 to 6 ounces. Now, as far as the actual interfaces and how these devices function, I have to say they are pretty much identical. They both have a home screen that looks just about the same. They both have a bookstore that looks pretty much the same. And when you're reading a book, you guessed it, they look pretty much the same. Each has their own little differences. Menus look a little different. The way you do something or change something looks a little bit different. But as far as functionality goes and user experience, they are almost identical with just some pretty insignificant differences, at least in my opinion. Now let's talk about firstly the Kindle Paperwhite and some pros about this device. And the very first thing I have to mention is that it is most obviously part of Amazon's ecosystem. Now that could be a con depending on how you feel about Amazon, and in some ways it is a con, but it is really cool to have a device that links with any other Amazon device that you might have. Now the Nook will do the same thing. Your Nook will link with any other Nook that you might have, but it's really good to be a part of Amazon's vast catalog of books. Another big pro, what goes hand in hand with the first one, is that on the Amazon Kindle bookstore, there are significantly more books. You have books by indie authors, you have books by pretty much anybody who wants to upload their book to Amazon. Amazon is pretty indiscriminate with that. You can just upload your book and it's on there. So if there's some guy that, wrote a book that you want to read and nobody else in the world knows about him except for you, you can read his book on the Kindle, and that's pretty cool. Another really big thing about the Kindle that I love personally is that only on the Kindle can you read books borrowed from Libby. If you don't know anything about Libby, I have a video. I'll link it in the description below. Basically, Libby is a way to access your county's digital library system. So just like you would walk to a library, drive to a library, and borrow a book, you can digitally borrow a book from your library and read it on your Kindle. It's absolutely free. It's really, really great. Again, I highly recommend checking out that video if you don't know anything about Libby. And as far as I know, the Kindle is the only device that allows you to do that. Not just the Paperwhite, any Kindle will do it. But that is a huge pro for me. And then lastly, another thing that kind of goes under this heading as well is Kindle Unlimited. Obviously, Kindle Unlimited is exclusive to the Kindle. You sign up, it's kind of like Netflix for books, $8, $9, $10 a month, and you can read unlimited books from, millions of books that are part of Kindle Unlimited. So it's pretty cool. And then another big thing about the Kindle Paperwhite is the battery life. So on paper, the Kindle is supposed to have a very similar battery to the Nook, but in the very short time that we've had the Nook, we have seen the battery is very much worse than the Kindle. And assuming you're only reading 3 or 4 hours a day, the battery on this thing will last forever on a single charge, whereas the Nook, unfortunately, will drain pretty quickly. Another pro about the device itself is that it is waterproof, or at least water resistant. I think it's like up to 300 feet or something. It's waterproof, so that's a really big pro. If you want to read by the pool, read in the bath, read, I don't know, anywhere, you can do it and not really worry too much about it, whereas the Nook is, as far as I could tell, not waterproof, and I'm not willing to test it myself. But being waterproof is obviously a huge pro. And then as far as books on each device, you can sideload books, which means you don't necessarily have to buy your books for Kindle from Amazon, and you don't necessarily have to buy your books for Nook from Barnes & Noble. You can buy them someplace else and sideload them on or upload them manually. It is a lot easier to do that on the Kindle than it is on the Nook, though you can technically do it on both devices, but I'm going to give the pro to the Kindle here because it's just a lot easier to do. And then lastly, we did talk about how basically the interfaces on these devices are the same, but I will say on the Amazon Kindle, you do have a little bit more customization, and it just feels a little more personalized. I don't really know how to quantify it and put it into words, but it just feels a little different on the Paperwhite. It just feels like more of a personal experience somehow. I don't know. My wife prefers the Nook, but I still prefer to read on the Kindle and how it looks. It's just different. I'm not sure how to say it really. But there are some cons for the Paperwhite, and I do want to mention those. The first is the placement of the power button. If you've ever seen any of my videos about the Kindle Paperwhite, you probably knew this was coming. My biggest pet peeve with this device is that the power button is located right on the bottom, which means if you're right-handed like me, it's right where your pinky would rest as you hold the device, which is extremely annoying because I accidentally turn the thing off so many times while I'm reading. It's just a huge headache. I don't know why they put the power button there, but they obviously did. Now, a lot of people are quick to point out, well, you can buy a case that alleviates the problem, and that is absolutely true. But out of the box, if you don't want to spend any extra money, you have this problem. It's easy to fix, sure, but it is still a problem that you're going to have unless you want to spend more money to fix it, which I feel like you shouldn't have to do. Another con with the Paperwhite is that unless you spend $20 extra, you are going to get ads enabled on your device. So we have them disabled on this one. I have a video showing you how you can do that for free. Definitely check that video out. It's in my Kindle tips and tricks video. I'll link that below. But out of the box, you're going to get ads on your Paperwhite unless you spend $20 extra. It seems silly to charge people $20 to not have to look at ads, especially when most of the time those ads are for like weird books that, I don't know. I don't want to get into all that. But anyway, it's just kind of annoying that they do that and charge you to not have ads. And then the last con is something that we've already mentioned, and that is that the maximum storage you can get on the base level Kindle Paperwhite, you can get the Signature Edition, which has more space, but on the base level, you get a maximum of 16 gigabytes of storage. I mentioned this last because it's really not a big deal. 16 gigabytes is a ton of storage for the average person, but it is kind of a con if you're looking for higher capacity on an e-reader. And then the very last thing that we need to mention, but certainly not the least important, is the price for this device. So the very base model version of the Kindle Paperwhite is $139, $140 for the base model. Not a bad price at all. I think it's definitely worth the money. Now moving on to the Nook, and this is the Nook Glowlight 4, I believe. I don't think I have said that yet. This is the most recent version of the Nook. Starting off with the pros, you might have noticed it. I don't know, it is pretty small and kind of far from the camera. But the biggest pro that I've found on this device is the page turn buttons. So one thing that I really wish the Paperwhite had was page turn buttons. And you can get the Oasis. It's $250, and at this point is pretty outdated. But it's the only option if you want page turn buttons on an Amazon device. I love that this relatively inexpensive device, we'll talk about the price in a minute, comes with the buttons. And it's super cool to just, no matter if you're right-handed or left-handed, have these buttons on either side of the device. Another thing I really love about this device is the placement of the power button. Speaking of buttons, unlike the Kindle Paperwhite, which has the button on the bottom, right where your pinky would rest, Nook has the power button out of the way, on the top, where you would almost never accidentally press it. Now, not to negate that and not to skip ahead to the cons too quickly, I will say that the Nook does have a little button on the bottom, whereas the Paperwhite has no button other than the power button. And I do find myself accidentally pressing this button a lot, which lights up the screen, which is kind of annoying because then you have to go up and press the power button and turn it off. So they do almost kind of cancel out, but I do love that at least they tried to get the power button out of the way and put it in a more reasonable spot. Now, moving on though with the pros, before we get to some of the cons that I do have with this device, I do love, as we've already said, that it comes standard with 32 gigabytes worth of storage. It's probably way too much for the average person, but it's nice to have. And then unlike the Kindle Paperwhite, the Nook comes standard with no ads. So out of the box, you do not have to look at any of those weird ads for those vampire romance books with naked werewolves and all that stuff. Out of the box, you just have nice, cute little designs, and they kind of rotate. Sometimes it's just like a pattern. This one is obviously a bookshelf. So it's just nice to not have to worry about ads, not have to pay extra, not have to try to work to get them taken off. Just comes out of the box, no ads. And the next one is from my wife. I haven't really found this in my experience, though she's obviously had a lot more time spent on the Nook than I have. But she says that the fonts on the Nook are a lot better than the fonts on the Paperwhite. So that's obviously important. That goes right in hand with reader experience. So nice fonts on the Nook. And then another thing that I really love about the Nook is that it has a feature called Lend Me. Now, I don't think this feature necessarily makes up for Libby on the Paperwhite, but Lend Me on the Nook is probably what it sounds like. You buy a book, and then if you have a friend that you want to lend that ebook to, you can do it. You just go on to your Barnes & Noble account on a desktop or maybe even on mobile, click on the book that you want to lend, click Lend Me, and then just type in their email address, and Barnes & Noble will send them a link that allows them to read your ebook for a week. I think that's super cool. I think it kind of tries to make ebooks more like physical books, because obviously if I read a book and I think it's really great, I'm going to, tell my friend, hey, borrow this book. This book was great. You should really read it. Well, one of the big things about ebooks that I don't like on the Kindle is that you can't really do that. You have to let your friend borrow your Kindle, which is kind of weird. I love that the Nook allows you to just share an ebook for a week. A week is, for most people, probably not a lot of time to read a book, especially if it's a big one. But I like that they at least made an effort. I think that is such a cool feature. Now, as far as the cons for the Nook goes, I have to be honest, the biggest one is that it is not part of Amazon's ecosystem. The Barnes & Noble bookstore is great. Their digital bookstore, I mean their physical bookstore is cool too. But their online store for ebooks is great. They have a lot of books, but they don't have the indie books. They don't have the books written by the guy that nobody in the world knows about except for you. For the most part, as far as I can tell, you can really only read books that are published by the big publishers, the mainstream type books. And maybe those are the only books that you like to read, and that's not an issue. But if you are a big fan of indie books or small time authors, then you might not be able to read their books on the Nook unless you sideload them, which is just kind of a pain in my opinion. As far as the design goes, a big con, as much as I love the page turn buttons on this thing, is it does have a smaller screen. We already did our super scientific comparison and saw that it is significantly smaller than the Paperwhite. The screen is significantly smaller, and our bezels, that area around the screen, is significantly bigger, which all adds up to me to look like kind of an outdated device. The comparison I always make is like a flat screen TV to one of those like not super old TVs, but like, you know, from the early 2000s. You remember you had the big TV with the huge bezels on the side. That is kind of the comparison in my mind. And it doesn't look bad by any means, but it just looks kind of clunky. And then as far as user experience goes, it is slow. Now, both of these devices are relatively slow. Neither of them are going to blow anybody away with their performance or anything like that. The Kindle will lag at times for sure, but searching for books on this thing, and sometimes even just turning the page, is pretty slow. Slower than you would probably expect. And then last but certainly not least, the price on the Nook is actually $150, which is $10 more than the Kindle Paperwhite. And so with all that, and again, this is not meant to be a detailed spec by spec comparison. This is mostly just an overview of my experience with each device so far. I have to say, if I was recommending an e-reader to someone today, I would recommend the Kindle Paperwhite. This device is $10 cheaper, first and foremost. As far as functionality goes, it is a lot better, a lot faster, a lot easier to use in my experience. It feels more updated. It feels just more like a device you would expect to purchase in 2024 now. That's weird to say. But either way, you really can't go wrong. They both have enough pros to justify the cost of each device. They're both great. If you just want to read a book, they're both going to do the job. So really, I would recommend either. But if I had to choose one, it would be the Paperwhite for sure. If you want to check out either of these devices in more detail, I have the links for them in the description below. You can read all the specs and all the reviews and just get your hands on these things and really test them out and explore for yourself. I also have more in-depth videos on the Kindle, all the Kindle models. I'll try to link those in the description below as well. Maybe you want to look at the Oasis, maybe you want more details about the Paperwhite or the Scribe or the Kindle Basic. All those videos which explore these devices in a lot more detail are going to be linked in the description below. But let me know in the comments, do you have a Nook? Do you have a Paperwhite? I would love your feedback on either of these devices. Maybe there's things about them that I don't know, pros, cons about each one that you want to share. Please feel free to do that. But as always, thank you so very much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.